Father Miguel sat alone in his dimly lit office, his eyes scanning the screens of the security monitors. A sense of unease had settled over him ever since a series of burglaries plagued the church. Night after night, he combed through the footage from hidden cameras, hoping to uncover a clue, but each hour passed with nothing more than flickering lights and empty hallways. Then, one night, something unexpected occurred. A familiar figure appeared on the screen, his silhouette unmistakable. It was Cardinal Luis Antonio. Unaware of the watchful eyes on him, the cardinal moved through the church, his actions sending a shiver down Father Miguel's spine. What happened next would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about the esteemed cardinal. Just 2 weeks earlier, the atmosphere in the parish was electric with anticipation. News spread like wildfire that Cardinal Luis Antonio, renowned for his compassion and humility, would be visiting the church. The townspeople eagerly gathered, excited to meet the man whose kindness had earned him respect and admiration far beyond the church walls. Families arrived early, crowding the pews and filling the courtyard. Everyone, it seemed, was eager to catch a glimpse of the cardinal. Father Miguel stood nervously by the entrance, adjusting his collar and trying to calm his nerves. He had met Cardinal Antonio before, but never under such circumstances. A sleek black car pulled up to the gravel driveway, and Miguel stepped forward, his palms clammy despite the cool breeze. The cardinal stepped out of the car, offering his signature warm smile and a slight bow to the gathered crowd. "Your Eminence," Miguel greeted, bowing deeply. The cardinal's presence seemed to uplift the entire crowd. Parishioners, who had been weighed down by the recent burglaries, suddenly found themselves filled with a renewed sense of hope and warmth. It was as if his mere presence had lifted their spirits. Inside the church, the cardinal moved gracefully through the crowd, shaking hands, offering blessings, and genuinely engaging with everyone he met. Father Miguel couldn't help but feel struck by the cardinal's humility. Despite his high rank, he carried himself with the grace of a servant. But as Miguel watched from the periphery, something felt off. Clara, the church housekeeper, usually a quiet and reserved woman, seemed unusually tense that day. She lingered in the shadows near the sacristy, her hands tightly clasped, her eyes darting nervously toward the cardinal. Then, when Cardinal Antonio approached, she stepped forward and whispered something to him. Miguel watched closely as the cardinal nodded, his expression unreadable. Clara's face paled as she turned abruptly and left the room, her eyes wide with an emotion Miguel couldn't quite place. The moment unsettled him. It wasn't like Clara to act so strangely, especially not in front of someone as revered as the cardinal. Miguel tried to shake off the unease, but he couldn't help but wonder what had passed between them. As the evening wore on, his thoughts kept circling back to that strange interaction. Later that night, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Father Miguel's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Groggily, he reached for it, his mind still foggy from the events of the evening. The caller ID displayed the security company overseeing the newly installed cameras. Miguel's heart sank. After weeks of uneventful monitoring, a call at this hour could only mean one thing: trouble. "Father Miguel," the operator said, "we detected some unusual activity near the east corridor. You may want to review the footage." Miguel hung up, quickly dressed, and made his way to the small office where the monitors were housed. The church was silent, its long corridors dark, only the faint moonlight seeping through the stained glass windows. As he sat in front of the security monitors, he navigated to the footage from earlier in the evening. At first, the screen displayed the usual empty hallways, the locked doors, and the familiar stillness. But then, as the timestamp passed 11 p.m., a shadowy figure emerged from the corner of the frame. It was Cardinal Luis Antonio. Miguel's heart skipped a beat as he leaned closer to the screen. The cardinal moved through the corridors with purpose, pausing every so often to look over his shoulder as though checking for something, or someone. Miguel's chest tightened. What could the cardinal be doing here at this hour? The footage grew more troubling as the cardinal approached Clara's quarters. He paused outside her door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Again, he glanced down the hallway, ensuring no one was watching. Satisfied, he entered the room, disappearing from view. Miguel froze. A chill ran down his spine, his mind racing. What was Cardinal Antonio doing in Clara's room at this time of night? Miguel's first instinct was to give the cardinal the benefit of the doubt. Surely, there was an innocent explanation for his actions. But as he watched the footage again, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The secrecy, the glances over his shoulder, the late hour, it all felt calculated. Why would the cardinal be acting so covertly? Miguel played the footage over and over, scrutinizing every detail. The cardinal's movements were deliberate, measured, almost as if he were hiding something. What was he doing in Clara's room? Miguel murmured aloud, his thoughts spiraling. He tried to dismiss the darker possibilities forming in his mind, but they refused to be silenced. 30 minutes later, Miguel turned off the footage and rubbed his temples. He knew he couldn't act on speculation alone. He needed more information. For now, he would wait and observe. But even as he left the office, a gnawing sense of unease lingered in the pit of his stomach. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't shake the feeling that delaying action would come with consequences he couldn't yet foresee. The next morning, the sun cast a warm glow over the church, but the atmosphere inside was far from bright. The parishioners whispered amongst themselves, exchanging furtive glances and hushed conversations. Word of the cardinal's late-night movements had somehow found its way into the congregation. "I heard he was seen near Clara's quarters," one woman murmured, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Surely it's nothing," another replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Cardinal Tagle is a man of God," a third voice interjected. There must be an explanation. But not everyone shared that view. "A man is a man," came a gruff voice from the back. Clergy or not, secrecy at that hour raises questions. Father Miguel moved through the crowd, each comment weighing heavily on him. He had hoped the incident would remain confined to the security footage, but now it was spreading throughout the parish, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it spiraled out of control. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't ignore what he had seen, but confronting Cardinal Tagle without clear evidence felt impossible. The cardinal was a senior clergyman, revered figure. A false accusation could do irreparable damage to the church and to Miguel himself. As he wrestled with his thoughts, Miguel's attention turned to Clara. She had always been quiet, but today she seemed almost ghost-like. She avoided eye contact, kept to herself, and declined invitations to join the other nuns in their morning prayers. Her shoulders were hunched, her gaze fixed on the floor, as though she were carrying a burden too heavy to bear. Miguel couldn't help but wonder, could her behavior be linked to the cardinal's actions, or was he simply letting his imagination run wild? Father Miguel sat once more in the dim glow of the monitor, his hands trembling as he replayed the footage from the previous night. Each frame showed the same troubling pattern: Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle leaving his quarters late at night, moving deliberately through the church corridors, pausing before entering Clara's room. The visits lasted over an hour, sometimes two, before the cardinal returned to his own quarters. What was really happening behind the closed doors of the church? Father Miguel knew the truth was just beyond his reach, but the more he uncovered, the more he feared that confronting it might change everything. One evening, Miguel observed something that unsettled him deeply. He saw the cardinal subtly motioning for Clara to come closer, only for her to stoop awkwardly over his lap. Each time Clara left his office, her eyes were rimmed with red, as though she had been crying. Miguel's unease grew with the repetition of this behavior. It wasn't a one-off, something about it seemed intentional, and the secrecy surrounding it made his mind spin with confusion. Was there an innocent explanation he could grasp? Part of him hoped so, but the history lingered like a shadow, casting doubt on everything. For hours, Miguel sat in silence, grappling with his thoughts. The idea of confronting Cardinal Tagle seemed unbearable. Doing so could cost him everything: his position, his reputation, and perhaps even the reputation of the church itself. Yet to stay silent felt equally wrong. He couldn't ignore what he had witnessed. But how could he act? His phone suddenly buzzed on the desk, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. With a sense of dread, he looked at the caller ID. It was from the security company. His heart sank. "Father Miguel," the operator's voice came through, cold and professional. "We reviewed some additional footage and have noticed a concerning pattern of behavior. Given the circumstances, we feel obligated to inform you that this conduct is highly irregular. It may require further investigation. Miguel thanked the caller and hung up, his stomach turning. If even the security company had flagged the cardinal's actions, how much longer could he afford to ignore it? He turned back to the screen, where an image of Cardinal Tagle stood frozen outside Clara's door, his face impassive, but something about the secrecy of his movements felt deeply off. Miguel's pulse quickened as a wave of urgency hit him. He sat back in his chair, the weight of his impending decision settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He thought about the parishioners, the trust they placed in the clergy, and how fragile that trust could be. He thought of Clara, the way she had withdrawn from everyone, her quiet demeanor betraying a struggle that Miguel couldn't fully understand. And he thought of the cardinal, a man revered by so many, whose reputation now hung in the balance. As dawn approached, Miguel finally stood. His decision was made. He couldn't ignore what he had seen, but he also knew he had to approach the cardinal with care and respect. Confrontation was inevitable, but it needed to be handled delicately. The truth, whatever it was, had to be uncovered. An hour later, Miguel stood outside Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle's quarters. His heart pounded in his chest so fiercely that he feared it might echo through the quiet hall. His grip tightened around his rosary, a small act to steady his nerves, before he knocked lightly on the door. It opened almost immediately. The cardinal stood before him, calm and welcoming. "Father Miguel," he said warmly. "What brings you here at this hour?" Miguel swallowed hard, stepping inside. The room was modest, in keeping with the cardinal's humble reputation. Yet Miguel's focus wasn't on the surroundings, but entirely on the man before him. "Your Eminence," Miguel began, his voice tight, "there's something I must address with you, though it pains me to do so." The cardinal gestured for him to sit, his expression serene. "Please, speak freely," he said, an air of patience in his tone. Miguel hesitated before continuing, carefully choosing his words. "Over the past several nights, I've noticed some unusual activity on the security footage. You've been visiting Clara's quarters late at night. The secrecy, the timing, it's raised questions that I can no longer ignore." A tense silence filled the room. Yet instead of reacting with anger or defensiveness, the cardinal's face softened. Understanding, not defiance, was reflected in his eyes. "Father Miguel," Tagle began, folding his hands, "Sister Clara has been struggling with severe depression. She came to me privately on my first day here, seeking guidance. She feels isolated, burdened by guilt, and overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities." Miguel's breath caught in his throat as the cardinal spoke. The image of Clara, the paleness of her face, the heaviness in her steps, flashed in his mind. Her face, her hunched posture, her isolation, all came flooding back to him. Tagle continued, his voice gentle, "These late-night meetings were her request. She felt safer speaking under the cover of darkness, away from the eyes of others. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about protecting her privacy. She feared how others might perceive her struggles." Miguel sat motionless, the weight of his assumptions crashing down on him. The truth, which had seemed so elusive, now hung in the air between them, clear as day. "I understand your concern," Cardinal Tagle said softly, his tone reassuring. "But sometimes our roles demand discretion. My only intention was to offer her solace and spiritual guidance." Miguel's chest seemed to lighten as he processed the cardinal's words. He had let his doubts cloud his judgment, allowing his fears and the whispers of the parishioners to steer him wrong. He lowered his head in apology. "I am sorry, Your Eminence," he said quietly. "I allowed doubt to blind me." The cardinal placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We are all human, Father Miguel. Even in our faith, fear can creep in. What matters is that we seek the truth and act with humility, as you have." As Miguel left the cardinal's quarters, a sense of peace began to settle over him, but it was tempered by a sobering realization, how easily appearances could deceive, how easily one could misjudge the intentions of others. That afternoon, Clara approached Father Miguel in the quiet of the chapel. "Thank you, Father," she whispered, her voice filled with relief, "for understanding and keeping my struggles private." Miguel nodded, humbled by her trust. The burden of his earlier doubts felt heavier now, but his resolution was firm. In the future, he would approach his challenges with greater care, caution, and compassion. He understood now that mistrust could exact a heavy toll on both the soul and the heart. Have you ever made an assumption, expecting the worst, only to be proven wrong? Share your experience with us in the comments. And as always, catch you in the next video.